You're at Spirit Matters Talk, spiritmatterstalk.com. I'm Dennis Ramondi, my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Joe Dispenza, your thoughts, Phil?
Oh, I thought it was fascinating, personally. I mean, Joe's personal story and the research he's doing are very compelling. I'd love to, have him back on, or I hope our listeners, who are fascinated will be able to find out more details, like on his website and so forth, because I'm curious about those finer points of his research.
For me, I thought he gave a tremendous presentation. He's very clear, very intelligent. I still have a hard time getting my head wrapped around somebody having all six vertebrae smashed up. I have problems with three vertebrae, and being able to just enter some mind space and redesign the back. It'd be like somebody correcting a broken leg. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening in that are thinking, hey, I had that experience. I can be done and all. And if it can be done, or somebody can goes into remission, and there's some way that one can figure out how that's done, and one can do it uh, to oneself or teach others how to do it. That's huge. That's fabulous. It's a great breakthrough. And I think in time, if he does enough of his own self-funded research, there will be others from more traditional medical communities that will come in and do further research on it. To me, I'm a little mixed on it because I really want to believe that can be done, but I'm still somewhat skeptical.
I think skepticism is called for
Hmm.
in these circumstances, and I would hope Joe, being a scientist, would approach his own findings with a certain amount of skepticism, and that's where the scientific method comes in of reproducing studies and designing studies effectively to rule out any kind of illusory early findings and so forth.
Hmm.
One of the things that's interesting to me, and I wish we'd thought of asking him, is often when people speak to the general public about these things, they bring out anecdotal evidence. And the question is, assuming all the anecdotes are true, um, are we only hearing the dramatic success stories? Are there also people using the same methods who are not getting those kind of results? Um, do people have exceptional results for a reason that could be identified? Some quality of the mind or body that makes them different from somebody with a
Right.
similar or same condition that doesn't heal. I mean, these are all important uh, kind of variables that science would be interested in pursuing to the extent we can heal ourselves and use the mind and to affect physiological conditions. How reliable are they? How predictable are they? Uh, that kind of thing would have to be
Right.
sorted out as
Right.
well.
Not long ago, I had on some cable station, and it was some faith healer, and it was actually a series of stations right next to each other, where it was one faith healer after another. So when I'm watching it, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's some plants in the audience, maybe some people it's just getting caught up in the moment, but there was no question that these healers that had big audiences, they were affecting people's physiologies and their physiological responses, and at least in some cases, I think they were legitimately those people were getting into better states of health, or some pain was going away. I wonder, is it the healer that and his or her influence, or is it the person getting in a certain state of mind and then obviously doing it themselves to themselves? I don't know, but it's gone on for years. Thousands upon thousands of people flock to these folks, and and I think some of them are just phonies that use plants and whatnot in the audience, but I think some of them actually, there's no question, they were having some influence on those people physiologically as well as psychologically, and I'd love for that to be further researched to separate the real from the unreal, and what's most important, and what Joe Dispenza has been working on, is systematizing it so you could take anyone and give them the tools to work in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, the difference, there's always been faith healers, there's always been shamans who can help heal people, there's always been people who have, what science would call spontaneous remissions, there's always been people who claim to have healed themselves. The question is, can you make these things reliable?
Right.
And the other thing is, can you make them reliable to the point where they reveal things about consciousness? Because one of the reasons I thought we should have Joe on the show is not so much the specifics of healing, which are useful, I'm sure, to people in our audience. But what does this kind of research tell us about who we are and what the nature of human identity is, what the nature of the mind and consciousness is, and if the mind can be trained through methods we used to associate with religion or spirituality, and if the effects of these practices are measurable and tangible, this is a kind of shift in how we understand certain things about human nature.
Right. And I do think the last great frontier is the human brain, and what goes on in there, and what areas affect what. And if nothing else, if at this point they could find out, well, if somebody does have some spontaneous healing and go into remission from cancer or whatever, what area of the brain is activated during that period of time, and how does that, and what's going on in that area of the brain, and how can that be stimulated in such a way that people can heal more naturally. Pharmaceuticals are helpful, but they're damaging to the system. They're very expensive. If there's more natural ways, that everybody is all for it. Are there ways to affect one's longevity naturally? And so, but we know from a lot of research over many years that meditation has definite, specific, unique physiological responses from the body, and how that relates, and can you tap in? Is it something that you have to develop over time in terms of refining brain physiology? I think there's a lot to be discovered there, and I think
I think we're just in the very beginning of the research. I mean, just think of how you phrased your statement. You said, which area of the brain? Well, there's this assumption I always hear in science that the brain has these specialized areas, and it, that seems to be true in certain things, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true for every function. Maybe it's not so localized. Maybe, the areas of the brain that don't seem to be active are actually doing things that they can't measure yet.
Right.
And
we got into that.
And maybe it's not just the brain.
Right. We got into that. The instrumentation is not developed enough, not far along down the road of refinement to really pick up on a lot that's going on. Brain waves, okay, that's one thing, but there's a lot more going on in the brain than brain waves. And I think that there are people developing better instrumentation. And I also think that 30 years ago, you might not even be able to have this conversation with scientists. They weren't interested. But now I think there's a lot of younger people in science who have backgrounds in alternative spirituality or in meditation or in healing that are curious and motivated and believe enough in the possibility to do research in this area. And you're not considered a quack anymore if you're interested in this sort of thing.
Right, and that's reinforced by 45 years of published studies, reliable studies, that so I would think that somebody going through graduate school now is exposed one hopes, graduate school, medical school, so forth, to the fact that these practices have been proven to have value, and that we've learned a whole lot about what used to be called just, religious belief, that there's actual scientific evidence for its efficacy. I mean, look at there are studies that are not about the brain or even physiology, but they've done outcome studies where people who have a dedicated spiritual path or are dedicated to their religious community have better health outcomes than people who don't. And one of the things I always found interesting is there are some studies that show that people who have a healthy religious or spiritual life, one that serves them and is very supportive to them and so forth, have better health outcomes than other religious people who might have what they call unhealthy religious involvement, where, things like they think God is punishing them because they're sick, or, they have doubts that they can't express, or, anything where an unhealthy spiritual life can actually damage your healing.
No, it's and I think these are areas that will be further explored, and there's an openness now. I was in graduate school in the early '70s in clinical psychology, and in a particular program I was in was very psychoanalytically based. And if you brought up, and I was doing TM then, I had started meditation then, and if I and I did, would bring it up, I got nothing but raised eyebrows, and it was just like, they not any interest, or from their side any credibility. That has 100% changed. You can
Yeah.
go to any a clinical program now, and it's in the curriculum. They'll at least touch upon it as
Right.
possibly a tool in the treatment of people. So that is we've come a million miles
Oh,
from
yeah.
where we were, but there's a long way to go.
Right, and people like us have that kind of historical perspective. I mean, I was a subject in one of the early TM studies. I
Scientific
remember,
American. I
yeah, the
remember
one
that.
that
Yeah,
Herbert Benson and Keith Wallace did
huge breakthrough.
from
Yeah.
Harvard Medical School. I was hanging around the Cambridge TM Center, and I was one of the volunteers. And, it was primitive stuff. It was a blood pressure cuff, and, as I recall, EEG. And now it's so much more sophisticated. But I remember being on a panel at a conference on drug abuse in like 1971 or 2, and I was talking about TM and as a potential valuable intervention with drug abuse and addiction and so forth. I practically got laughed off the stage.
Right. That
You know,
I had similar experiences where I was just like, and by the way, for those listening in, the interview we did recently with Paul Mills, who's a professor at University of California, San Diego, and now is the head of research for the Chopra Center for Wellbeing in San Diego. He touches upon much of this and the different studies that are being done, and I think all of these.
and so
Yeah,
did Roger Walsh in his
right.
interview.
Yeah, and he's been a real. Roger Waltz was involved in this type of research long ago, before anybody else was
Right.
really involved with it. So, anyway, we should probably wrap it up. But very good one, and we'll have more shows that talk about this sort of thing, and also find out what kind of research is going on in these areas.
Very good.
Spirit Matters Talk, spiritmatterstalk.com. And please, when you come to the site, take a few seconds and subscribe so that we can send you information, and it's all free.
And tell your friends.
Tell your friends. All right, thanks. Bye.
Okay. See you then.